Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Florida Sound Archive podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Kaiser, and today's guests are Kreamy Lectric Santa. I got Priya Ray, Robert Price here. Welcome in. How are you both?
Good. We're
Good,
doing
good.
good.
It's
Living.
That's glad to hear that you're living and glad to see you both here on the podcast. I've been really looking forward to having you both on to tell the story of the infamous KLS. Yeah. So
The
KLS is originally from you guys are
infamous.
originally you're originally from Miami, right?
Yeah, the band is originally from Miami. We are not native Miami people, but the band started in Miami.
Yeah, the band started in Miami. So where did you both come from and how did you get to Florida?
You want me to go first? Okay.
I guess.
Well, um I am like a first generation American. My father came here from India and had a PhD. He's a really smart man, had a PhD in engineering, and then did a sabbatical and was one of the earliest biomedical engineering people, like in the 70s, and wrote lots of books and, was kind of known as a researcher and stuff. So anyway, my life was like moving. I was born in State College, Pennsylvania, but I moved about 13 times through my childhood because I don't know. I didn't realize it as a kid, but now as an adult, I'm like, oh, my dad was probably trying to get tenure or something like that. And I was all like, no, why? Why are you ruining my life? So my dad got a job at Florida International University because they wanted someone to create the mechanical engineering department there, which he did. And it's a thriving mechanical engineering department. And it's because of him, like he kind of started all that going. But anyway, so he moved, and it was my senior year of high school. So he was like, we're going to move. And then I was just like, no, I will not move in the middle of the year of my senior year. I want to enjoy my last year of high school. And then I will go to Florida International University as a new person that doesn't know, what the college is. It's just, I mean, I don't know. Florida International University did have a lot of local people that went to the same high school. So they all knew each other. But, when you go to college, it's a new thing and everyone's starting new. So I was like, so I told my father, no, you can't do this to me. So the last year of my high school, my father traveled back and forth between Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is where I did high school, and Miami, Florida, where I ended up going to college. So that's how I ended up in Florida. And Robert, now it's your turn.
I was raised by a pack of wild Jews in Brooklyn, New York, pretty much my first 18 years. Um, and my first bunch of years were pretty much getting my ass beaten. My dad died when I was 8. I was left to my own accord. I was a lost soul, pretty much hiding behind my desk most of the time or watching inappropriate horror movies. And what happened? Well, I started discovering like college radio and listening to WFMU and WNYU and I forget the one in Staten Island, and discovering like other things besides the I don't know, besides like, running home from school, not getting beaten up. It seemed culturally a lot more enlightened than say disco, which was what pretty much everyone surrounding me was into, or classic rock. So I started discovering like all this like crazy wild music, like Roxy Music, and I didn't have much of an allowance when I was a kid, so I had like $5 to like go out and buy records, and usually hit the cutout bins at like God, what was that place again? Oh God, now I can't think of the names of the record store. It doesn't really matter; they don't exist anymore. But I used to go out, and back then the cutout bins, you'd find Sparks records. I found Poly Rock. I found a lot of stuff that now people, deem relevant and good. But back then it was just like you could find those records for $2, which was great. And that kind of, started me off looking for other things. Because people have a preconceived notion about New York that it was always this cultural mecca, but pretty much Brooklyn growing up at that time in the 60s, 70s, early 80s. Well, I was born in 65, so 58 right now. Back then, it was almost like being in a rural town because there were people who did not leave like 3 city blocks. They would stay within like one range of area, and they would, get pizza at this place and hang out in front of the library and do whatever. And it was very simple. Like a lot of people were not, cultural or going out to the city or whatever. Not everybody, but a lot of people that, live there. Yeah, we moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, me and my mother, and it was undeveloped and it sucked. And I started trying to get music together and do something to keep myself from offing myself. And
where in Fort Lauderdale was it, Robert?
Sunrise.
It was right
Sunrise.
down it was real. You could see the Sunrise Musical Center or theater or what, I forget what that place was.
One of my first friends out there, I met James Genovese, who was in SLA and White Riot, and also Derek Lehman, or Derek Hyde now, who, he's playing a bunch of bands out there. I forget who it was with. Maybe it was John Messings, who does the Abominable Dr. John now. He was in the Prom Sluts with me. We went on to like the roof of the Sunrise Musical Center. We're drinking up there and just taking pissing on the construction equipment that was like knocking down the wooded area right there. It was really kind of early on when like that area hadn't developed yet. So anyway.
Yeah, that's probably for the best at that point, right? Anyway.
Well, yeah, I don't think we really proved much. I mean,
yeah.
The piss was all dry from the heat by the time the crew came out. So
it probably smelled pretty horrible.
I would imagine. And because because you both had 2 totally different upbringings, how did you kind of meet in terms of your musical tastes?
Oh, musical taste. I don't know. I mean, Robert was from New York, and he wasn't really, I was, more of a suburban kid than Robert was, more urban than I was. So I really got into punk rock, but I was also very creative. And Robert is, and he still is, very more exploratory with music. So he wasn't really into punk exactly, but like kind of, like, but stuff that I found interesting. And of course, so we did live when cassette tapes existed. So when Robert and I first met, he did make me this really awesome mixtape that I listened to, and it had bands like, God, I think it had bands like Television and
Richard Hell, the Void,
maybe Richard Hell, we're Thinking Fellers Union on it then. I
think we got into them later.
Yeah, maybe we got, but I'm trying to remember because I listened to the tape all the time, but now of course I can't remember what was on it exactly.
The only thing I could think of now is I put Heat Miser from the Rankin Bass Christmas thing.
Yeah, and Robert was, and I think he's probably done this since he was like a little kid, but he's always like into like the way KLS's music are on records. It's very Robert style. He likes, like, even when he made a mixtape, it wasn't like, oh, the song after song. It was weird. It was like a song and some weird sample.
I put way too much work
and
into
then
something.
Yeah, he put a lot of work into the mixtape, but it was really good, and I listened to it all the time. So
where do you remember meeting each other?
Okay, so that's what I was going to say. We met each other at Churchill. So
initially,
like, I think I met Robert like before
the Prom Sluts. Me and Johnny Bravo went to Churchill's at a show we weren't playing at, and we just made like t-shirts and we were really excited about it. And for some reason, I don't think we had any shows. We didn't play very often during the initial days of the Prom Sluts. And basically, we just, for some astoundingly brilliant idea, just let's go to a show we're not playing at where nobody knows who the fuck we are and try to sell our t-shirts. And we were just being really obnoxious, and nobody bought it.
So yeah, and that's when I met Robert.
One of the victims.
I was one of the victims. Of like, they were like saying, and I was like, all right. So that I do have a vague memory of that. But then what ended up happening was I had this roommate, because I was going to FIU and I was living in the dorms actually, and my college roommate was dating Robert's best friend, or at the time
Tom, who was in the Spooky Teas with Derek, I think, and
yeah, I forget all the bands.
Tom Seagraves. But anyway, yeah, she had a French roommate that
she lost her keys.
Judith.
She locked her keys in the car. So she called me. It was like, Priya, I locked my keys in the car. Can you bring the extra keys? So I was like, okay. So I drove up there to bring her the keys. And was it at your house? Or
that was at Tom's house.
Oh yeah. So I went to Tom's house, and that's where we just hung out, and I really liked him a lot because he was just really funny and said all these funny things, and I just thought, I really liked him. So then, I was telling my friend, oh, I like that guy, and then, so this is a funny story about me and Robert. So basically, like, Tom told Robert, oh, Priya likes you, and Robert was like, what? Why would she like me, type of thing. So then I called him, and he thought I was like, I think he was friends with this girl that was in her last year of high school doing a yearbook thing, and he was like trying to get some weird writing into their yearbook. So he thought that's
I always did like kind of a stream of consciousness style writing, and I think she just wanted to freak out all her friends in high school. So I was going to write something really bizarre that was her.
And that's who Robert thought I was when I called him. I was like, what? Like, so he was saying all this stuff.
We talked for about 40 minutes before I realized she was Priya.
Yeah, because then I was like...
And she still was interested.
And I was just like, do you know who this is, right? I think you think I'm someone else. That's what I said. And he was like, oh. And then when he realized it was me, then he was like, oh no, I'm mortified in it there. So I'm like, it's okay. I don't care. That's fine.
I'm really good at that.
So yeah, so that's like our meeting story. But he was in the Prom Sluts, and that was his band at the time. And so yeah, so that's how that all began.
Yeah, no, that's a good story. And with the Prom Sluts, you said that you played at Churchill's. What were some other venues that were around at that time that you remember, not just playing shows but also seeing shows?
Played like Squeeze, right? We played
Musicians Exchange.
Our last show was Musicians Exchange with Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids. Maybe you've heard of them. I don't know.
That sounds familiar.
Was back breaking audibly on stage. Yeah, I was kind of getting really, I don't know. Yeah, so that was our last show. And then pretty much like Kreamy Lectric Santa kind of started out of like, I just started going out to Miami and hanging out more with Priya, and like having different friends that she was going to college with, and we were just kind of breaking away from the constraints of a more conventional rock band. I mean, the Prom Sluts were more like garage rock.
What other places did the Prom Sluts?
I don't know. We played played Johnny Bravo's house.
A lot of house shows. Like
we did a lot of house shows.
That's like back then. There were also a lot of house shows which don't seem to exist that much anymore. So people would just have shows at their houses and stuff.
I remember I remember the Fabroids, which was the band before the Prom Sluts, and that was with Derek too. And I don't know if Johnny Bravo was playing yet. But yeah, I remember playing a girls' Sweet 16 party, which they all like left, and we were stuck in the room with the parents, and like that was pretty terrible.
Why did what do you remember about why they left in the middle of you playing?
We sucked. and they were in high school and we weren't cool. We
Who
sucked.
who asked you all to play that Sweet 16 party, you remember?
There was a kid, Pierre, who had like he had a really cool old analog synth, which at the time you didn't really see them that much, but when you did, they were really cheap. And he never changed the sounds on it. So it was like one of these like really cool patchable analog synths. And I was like, fuck, I've always wanted one of these. I'll give you something for this. He's like, no, I want to keep it. And all he did was use the same screeching, obnoxious sound. He discovered a sound that sounded good. He didn't want to spend 4 hours like patching and experimenting and taking a chance and doing whatever. So anyway, Pierre was friends with this 16-year-old girl. I think Pierre was actually, he might have been young. I think he was young. Actually, Derek was 16 when I first started playing with him. So yeah, I mean, all the kids went out. We did that back then. It was kind of a toss up. We all did different covers that the different band members wanted to do. So I think like Pierre brought Jet Airliner and maybe also to the Cars song, Just What I Needed. And I did like my own songs because from the get-go, I never wanted to do covers really, unless, my take on covers is take a bad song and make it good, or do a good song and do it completely different. And it was boring and tedious. But yeah, so the Prom Sluts, yeah, we also played like the first official kind of punk type show at Churchill's when Todd Jenkins and me first met Dave and did the first show. That was, I think, Broken Talent and Prom Sluts, and there was 3 or 4 other bands. I forget. I can't remember their names right now. But anyway, that's, I'm kind of going all over the place. But
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah. I mean, so you mentioned Broken Talent. What do you remember about that band? Because they were one of the earliest hardcore punk bands from that period.
Great, man. I mean, they weren't really even hardcore. They were just kind of weird, They were just they were kind of like more like Flipper, or they were kind of the anti-band. Like a lot of people didn't like Broken Talent at all back then. And I remember a friend of mine when I first moved to Florida was telling me, oh yeah, they really suck. And at first I kind of avoided them, and then I heard like My God Could Beat Up Your God, and I was like, man, this is fucking awesome, man. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's a brilliant sentiment, man. That was just great. Their stuff was awesome, and yeah, they were a lot of fun when I first moved there.
And Morbid Opera.
They played a few shows, but I only saw Broken Talent like maybe twice. I saw a show at Brockway, which was
place.
Yeah, it was actually at University of Miami, and Malcolm Tent and I believe Todd Jenkins were booking shows there, and they did a show with like Pagan Faith and Broken Talent. I think was it SLA before, maybe White Riot, which was the band that predated
the F Boys.
The F Boys. They all like left the band and started the F Boys. Might have played, I forget what bands played that show, but actually that probably came later. Sorry, I'm dating myself here. I'm all over the freaking map. But anyway, they did shows at the Brockway Theater, and apparently the Brockway Theater said no more punk shows because the university didn't take kindly to punk rockers peeing on the on the campus, or leaving beer cans out, or destroying things. I don't know how bad it got, but Todd said to me, hey man, I know this really cool bar that's in Little Haiti. And at the time, like, nobody came out to Little Haiti. It was just kind of, its own place. It was like a Haitian neighborhood, and it was cool. There were a lot of good record stores there and stuff. And I kick myself to this day, I never really frequented those places and picked up a bunch of stuff there. But he brought me out there. It was this British pub, which is like, what the hell is a British pub doing in the Haitian neighborhood? It was really weird. And Dave had been there forever, and all these like local drunks would hang out there. I think Charlie Pickett might have played a show there before. Iko might have played a show there before. And Todd brings me out there, and Dave Daniels is standing there at the bar, and literally the cockroaches are just crawling all over. It's like, come to daddy. Like, they're just totally like, they're just so comfortable with him. They're just like, and he's like swatting them off and like, just continue talking, whatever. And he's like, yeah, we could, do our shows here, blah, blah, blah. And then we're like, okay, oh no, Todd, there's no PA, there's no stage, there's nothing here that's really like drawing me to this place. But Todd's like, no, we should do it. So we did. I mean, in the first few years, there was no stage. I used to drag out this crappy PA that I bought for $100 that was like these huge long columns with like 3-inch speakers. So it had like 13 3-inch speakers in each one or something ridiculous. It sounded like total crap. And we started doing shows there. It happened. And like at the time, I remember Dave saying to us, like, oh yeah, we can have a skiffle band on Wednesday. And I don't know if you know what skiffle is.
I've heard of skiffle.
The British, the Beatles were a skiffle band apparently before they were the Beatles, but it was kind of like British hillbilly music. It was like this folk movement that happened in Britain during the early 60s. And I'm like, oh, good luck getting a skiffle band in Miami to play your bar, man. But yeah, those early days were pretty crazy, man.
Did they have air conditioner at that time in that place?
I don't think so.
Every now and then the parachute hanging from the ceiling would fall on all the cockroaches.
Yeah, they're so gross.
Spread their palmetto wings to
all these cockroaches.
Cool us off. No, I don't think they did back then. I don't think they did. I don't know. It got fucking hot, crazy.
I mean, he must have had some sort of air conditioning because it was a bar, but it was just always hot.
So it was always hot. Yeah, it was torturously hot, especially in the early days. And what happened was, like, for several years, like, Todd stopped doing it after a few months, and then I continued doing it. And then Rat got involved, or Frank Filestro, Rat Bastard, and he talked Dave into investing in getting a stage, in getting a PA. He even talked him into building an ADAT machine in the place, which is why that the music for the compilations that Rat put out, came out from that, the recordings from the board. And things just started going a little better and better as things progressed, because back in the early days, as I said, the PA just sounded like total ass.
Yeah,
there was no way. And like, rarely, like back then too, bands wouldn't want to come out to Miami because it was like, I think there was one band, Cattywampus, that came out from Baltimore, and they were kind of like this, like, kind of Baltimore sort of. This is Godzuki. This is our new drummer. She plays pads.
Nice.
Yeah. So,
quick question. How did you meet Rat Bastard, and talk about what you feel regarding his importance for the scene at that time and all that he was able to contribute as well?
Rat at the time, I think, initially worked for Eastern Airlines and then Delta Airlines. I believe chronologically that's how it happened. When Eastern went under, he just moved around, and he was like, I understand the guy who landed the planes. But back then, Rat didn't drink or do anything. He just basically, like, didn't sleep, and like, he recorded bands for free or cheap. So pretty much like all the local bands back then used to record, at Sync Studios, including us, and
including the Prom Sluts and KLS.
Yeah, actually, some of the first we recorded some Prom Slut stuff at there, and I remember actually Rat, because he didn't sleep, would quite often be on the board doing stuff, and then he would, like, whenever there was a quiet moment, he would start nod out. You'd think he was on heroin or something, but it was just because he didn't sleep. And everyone in the room would be like,
yeah, like when the Prom Sluts were recording, he would actually fall asleep while they were
in between songs, like, things would stop.
Between songs, during the song, sometimes he would sleep, and then because I was in the booth with him, so I just clap really, because I saw sleep, so I clap really loud, like when they did it, and he would wake up and be like, "Oh, let me stop." So it was just like funny because I was just like, we were just like, "What's the?" When we were young, and we're like, "What's the deal?" But now of course we realize, oh yeah, he was lighting the candle
He's
on
burnt the
both
candle
ends.
both ends. I mean,
So, in answer to your question, he's very important because even though he was working and he had the studio, and he recorded any band that wanted to record from Miami, because I think he really believed, he really wanted to make Miami an important.
and to this day, he has
music
tapes of stuff that like nobody has, like some really like rare stuff on ADAT that he's recorded, or I know he might have taped stuff too from before the ADAT thing, because he was heralding the ADAT as being this new technology that was great, but now you could buy a machine for like $100. They were like $3,000 went for per machine, and they were each 8 tracks. So he would layer up like 4 of them. So he'd have like, a lot of tracks. You know what ADAT is? It was videotape, but it was digital. So it's similar to a DAT tape, but it was digital videotape. So you could layer up, like each one would be 8 tracks, and you could layer them up and have a big stack of these freaking machines. And he had like 48 tracks or whatever at Sync Studios. And I think he did transfer everything to digital, but he has like KLS stuff that we don't even have, because we left it. Priya decided to leave it with him for safety reasons, but
yeah, I was like, I think we should leave this with him.
We did live in, like,
we would have lost. It would not be. We wouldn't know where.
I still have my tapes, but yeah.
There you go. What do you remember about the early formation of KLS?
You sucked.
We just, I would always say we weren't really a band. We were more of a collective, because the early days, so when the Prom Sluts broke up, Robert had already kind of moved to Miami and we were living together. So the early formation of KLS was just kind of like just people we came across, people that would come into our house were like, oh, play in the band. So the band was always like people that we just met, that we just kind of clicked with, or someone that was looking to do something would be like, oh yeah,
you got the right look.
Yeah,
you should be in our band. You're a rapper. You play sax.
And then we would, look for drummers. And then the other day, I think we were kind of talking about these older lineups. Like we had this guy Charlie Michaels, who's he was British, but he lived in Miami and he played drums. And this other guy Dan, who was like best friends with my art school teacher's husband, and he played bass.
And then there's Dale, who rapped.
We had a rapper, because we got this rapper guy. We're like, rap with us.
Like, whatever, man. We had actually backup singers initially. Priya, Kirsten, Katie, and Judith, the girl Judith that was dating my friend Tom, were Yummy Fur, which was named after the Chester Gould. Was that it? I don't know. This underground comic, Yummy Fur. And they sang backup vocals, and then
for the Prom Sluts
started formulating. Priya played violin, like classical violin, when she was in school, when she was in elementary school, maybe high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I talked her into playing violin with us. She really didn't want to return to it because she had PTSD from playing violin.
That's a little exaggerant, but
yeah, emotionally distraught. She really had a hard time coming to.
I didn't have PTSD.
Connect with the music.
Okay, Robert, you need to be quiet now. Yeah.
How did you know violin was like an instrument you wanted in this band?
It was different. We never had one. She played it in the Prom Sluts, actually. The Ballad of Charlie Pickett.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we did a song, The Ballad of Charlie Pickett, and the Prom Sluts, and Priya played violin on that. And I think you might have played on another song on the cassette that we did.
I don't remember. It was so long ago.
I forget. But I don't know. We're into Camper Van Beethoven. I was into like Woody Guthrie, and I think even like Django Reinhardt was a thing. So I loved Stefan Grappelli, and the violin could be extremely painful, especially when you amplify it and have no idea what the fuck you're doing. If you turn up the highs all the way,
Yeah, and I don't know. It's just like with KLS, we weren't really like, this is what we didn't like have a vision for the band. It was just more like we just want to be creative. And that was kind of the go-to. So we've had, like we said, we had rappers, we've had people play accordion, we've had
We didn't have
one rapper, yeah, one rapper. And we had people play accordion or just whatever people could play. We had boxing. So it was just like whoever we came across, we're like, oh, you want to play with us? Like,
Yeah.
Like a walking abortion during the early years. It took a while for us to actually formulate into something real. I mean, for a while, I mean, we did have like things started going well. We had like Rob Vega playing bass, and we had like was Tim Vaughn playing drums at the time? Yeah, we had Tim Vaughn, who actually played in the Prom Sluts and then moved out to Miami and started playing with us. And it started getting better. And then love Rob. He was great. I mean, perfect Rob story. I'll tell you this one. It's great. Rob basically like made up his own language, especially when he was on certain things or in certain preoccupied states, and his hair would get really big. I'm not going to elaborate too much, Priya, because he does have a day job now.
Oh, I don't.
And that was like 30 years ago, right?
Talk about
so anyway, like when we started doing shows at Churchill's, and there was a period where a lot of punk bands we would just book anyone, and we started coming across like bands like Chicken Head, and this is before the Crumbs, but Los Canadians, and then the Crumbs happened,
the Tri-Rails
and Cavity, and that whole scene started happening.
Cavity was Crawl back then.
They were Crawl initially. Yeah. And then Harry Pussy, Bill was in this band, Trash Monkeys, played drums, our favorite band from Miami by far. They were just amazing. But we started doing shows at Churchill's with all these bands, and I forget where I was going with this. I totally lost myself. But yeah, I mean that started becoming.
You were talking about Rob.
Yeah. So then basically we Rob left, and
no, Rob's hair. You're telling a story.
Yes. Okay, so the story is Chuck Luce and Eric Lyle, actually Erica Dawn Lyle now, were in Chicken Head, and they started doing these generator shows. So they started doing these shows, like they would go out to the Everglades and set up a generator, and like everyone would just do carpooling, or they'd all meet at the 7-Eleven, everyone jump in one car or 3 cars and drive you out to this like middle of nowhere. It was almost like, we're all going to be freaking killed. But we were pretty much by the mosquitoes, especially in the Everglades. So one of the shows they had was at a rock quarry, and they were, we're doing construction and building like new homes, and going there on a weekend. Of course, there was nobody there, nobody watching it. So we went out to this rock quarry, and Rob did not show up. And it's like, holy shit, we're supposed to play. And then there was this band Sloth, and the kid had like this crazy huge mohawk. And he's like, we had it on tape at one point, I remember, or something. He's like, why isn't anyone slam dancing? Sebastian, why are you slam dancing? It's like, because it's a fucking rock quarry. Because you're gonna die. You're gonna fuck up yourself like really badly. So anyway, Rob finally shows up, and at the time he was doing these setting up these shows, and he was doing House of Pain, and literally showed up to this punk rock show wearing all this House of Pain attire, like the band who did Jump Around. Everything was in this plaid green color. And it was just like,
and it said House of Pain.
It said House of Pain, like everything, his shorts, his shoes, everything. His hat. It was like, he was just cracking up about it. And yeah. And at the time, I think we were playing with Paul Enema, or Paul LaCours. He doesn't like to be called Paul Enema, from Lethal Yellow and the Stun Guns. And I remember, like, there's still pictures floating around of that show. It was by far the worst show we ever played because the sound was horrible. It was in a rock quarry. It was freaking sweltering hot. It was like 110 degrees. And there's like great photos from that. I just remember tackling Paul.
By Josie.
Josie.
I think she goes by I don't know Josie's last name. I'm sorry, Josie.
Sorry, I'm caffeinated. I'm really rambling.
Were you at the show that Chuck Luce set himself on fire at the Chicken Head show at Churchill's? Were you there?
That too.
No, that's a different show where he set himself on fire.
No,
but
that was a show we were at, but we were all, I mean, we probably put that show on.
But the thing is, like, okay, so like all the bands didn't have their own equipment. We did.
A lot of
them did. Yeah. They would borrow our equipment. So there was we had this drummer whose name was Dave, and I don't remember his last name. He was this band
called Kind Zen Temple, which were kind of cool. They were sort of like weird hippie offshoot.
They were like Sonic Youth meets the Grateful Dead.
They would do like kind of Sonic Youth type stuff, but more like Grateful Dead, like jamming, but getting really intense. And we liked them. They were really good, but they were just kind of like even more in that direction than we were, even because we did really short songs. They would just play and just get really like intense. But the drummer, Dave, had this really expensive drum set. He was like a child actor.
You tell the story. It's like, this guy did. So anyway, Dave, who played with us, and I don't remember him because we called him Dave Farr because he kind of looked like
Reuben Farr
from Reuben Ed.
Crispin Glover.
It was this movie that we were obsessed with, the Crispin Glover movie, and Reuben Farr was so we call, and he kind of looked like this character, so we would call him Dave Farr. But anyway, Dave had a really expensive drum set, and he didn't want anyone to ever to use it, and which I understood. So Chuck came up to me at the show, and he's like, "Priya, can we use your drummer set?" And I was like,
he was playing with us for a short while.
Yeah, he played drums with, obviously he was playing.
I don't know if he was playing with us then. He might have just been playing with them. But anyway.
No, he was playing drums with us. Anyway, so then I was like, okay, Chuck, I will ask our drummer, but his drum set is really expensive and you can't do anything to it. You can't throw it. You can't do all the stuff you usually do. You can't do that. You have to
Chickenhead were known for doing crazy shit like Chuck setting himself on fire, or like I remember one show they were borrowing our gear, one of the first shows Chicken Ever played, and I, bands would play and I just let them use the PA and I would just hang out, whatever. I remember James Genovese once screaming at me like, "Man, go in there. That guy, the guitarist for Chickenhead, is like on the bar with your Rickenbacker guitar, sliding his whole body weight over the guitar and just scraping on the bar."
That was Erica. So like basically, I was like, okay, Chuck, you have to promise me you won't do any insane things because this guy's really protective of his drum set.
You have an idea where this is going.
So then he's like, I promise. So then I was like, okay. So then I went to Dave. I was like, Dave, can you let this guy use your drum set? They promise they won't do anything and they'll be very careful, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, all right, fine. Okay, yeah, I'll do it. And I was like, okay, cool, thanks. So then I was like, okay, yeah, Chuck, he said he could do it. So this was like really the chicken head set was Chuck rode his motorcycle onto and I was standing next to Dave while this was happening. So what he did was he drove his motorcycle onto the stage and leaned it against the drum set. And that was like the show. That was it. That was like, they weren't going to play anything. That was like kind of the set, was he was going to drive his motorcycle on stage and that was it. So then I was like standing next to Dave. And
that was the show before he set himself on fire. I think I think go up on that a little bit.
Maybe. I can't even remember. I don't know the chronology of that, but yeah, but I was standing next to Dave and I was like, oh my God, Chuck, I'm going to kill you. But fortunately, the drum set was not hurt or damaged. And Dave didn't really, he wasn't really upset. I mean, he was probably upset. He was probably upset that this guy was leaving a motorcycle again. But the drums didn't get damaged. Because I think he would have been like, you guys have to pay for this piece or that piece, which he didn't do. So
yeah,
his drum set didn't get damaged.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So in that sense, I got off like, and then I think I told Chuck, I will never ever I'm never gonna ask anyone to let you drum set again. And he was just like, okay. So
that's great. Yeah.
Well, it's best to have your own gear if you're going to destroy gear.
Yeah, if you're going to do stuff like that, you should get.
Yes.
But the funny thing, I'm going to tell you the funny thing about all those people, when they got equipment, I'm not sure about Chuck, but like when the rest of these people got equipment, they weren't so willing to lend it to other people. They were just, because later in life, I'd be like, why can't they use this person's drum set? It's like, oh, they don't want to lend it because they're afraid someone's going to trash it. I was like, what? Oh my God. Don't they remember what other people did
is,
then?
Right, the standards of excellence.
Yeah.
You see it in politics quite often.
So yeah, so that was the funny thing, because we were very supportive. We've always been a very community oriented people, so we're very, we were willing to lend our equipment and do whatever needed to be done to kind of help form the scene.
And we're still very
and we still are like that, but now we live in a town that we're not originally from, and there's more history here, so we don't have to do that. But if fans do contact us, like, can you book us a show where you live? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So we do.
And thinking back to that time period, right, you were just telling some of those stories, what were some of the crowds like back then?
Crowds, everybody was great. Everyone got wasted. I don't even I can't, it's all a big one blur to me. Like, people were really, I don't know, maybe it was like the 90s. So, because I kind of think about it in comparison to now, like how much freer people were and happier. And I just think it was just a happier, more free time, right?
People were
very impetuous and really got wasted. And like, people just were drinking and partying and having fun. And there wasn't really, like, I'll have to, like, I should have thought about these stories, but yeah, I just never, I mean, like, we would I remember at one KLS show, someone set a phone book up, threw it on the stage, like things like that were going on. Like,
and we always hear stories like people,
and then
like,
when the stun guns
would play. 14 and I got into Churchill's, I just walked in the door and drank, and so we didn't watch the door a lot of times.
Yes,
like Dave from the get-go said, I'd get the bar, you get the door, and we're like, fuck it, we're not going to watch the door. I don't want to.
Yeah, sometimes we didn't, and we would
party in the back.
We would watch it, and that was like more for local shows. So like when bands started touring down to Miami, then we would watch the door, and we would just give them all the money. So that's how we would ensure bands would keep coming, because that's the problem, is bands don't want to tour all the way down to Miami, and now gas is so expensive, so I imagine that's like,
but even back then,
even worse. But back then gas was cheap and people still didn't want to.
When we booked tours back then,
money on gas.
It was crazy, because Ivy from Los Canadians and Timmy from Los Canadians, and he played with us as well, they traveled out to California, so they had a lot of connections out there and knew a lot of places along the way, and they did this, like, I think they were jumping trains and stuff back then. Kind of interesting. You definitely want to talk to those guys. But they met a lot of people along the way. So there was them.
It was also really, it was Ivy. Ivy was really the person that would kind of work with in conjunction with us to kind of get bands.
There was like
from the Bay Area
too, but they were kind of like more in that metal vein, and that the whole scene, and it was kind of a little higher tier up, I guess, as far as like getting those types of shows. And then there was Harry Pussy, so we knew, like, when we were booking tours, we what's that?
Nothing.
Oh, when we were booking tours, we would Priya would either have to mention like Harry Pussy, Cavity, or Los Canadians Chicken Head as far as getting shows. And then a lot of times too, because our band was like weird and we didn't really fit into anything directly, she would make a bunch of freaking phone calls. And back then it wasn't like cell phones. It was like, we'd come back from tour, we'd go on tour, first of all, and a lot of places she couldn't get a hold of because they wouldn't call her back. We'd show up there and there's like, the show wouldn't exist, or we'd have to meet some people and like do a house party or something and get like less than what gas money was then, and it was very little. So
that being said, people,
or Book Your Own Fucking Life, Maxim Rock and Roll put out this thing every year, which people would put in like where they lived and what, they could press things for you, or they could book shows in their house or whatever. So that was also a big network back then as far as getting shows and doing things. This is before the internet became, a viable resource. So we kind of fell back on that, but then we'd get back from tour and then we'd get our bill. So we'd first of all lose money on tour, and then we'd get our phone bill. It was like $400 for all these long distance phone calls trying to book shows. So it kind of sucked. But even back in the day, like I remember talking to Mike O'Brien. Mike O'Brien from the Eat, he told stories about like back then it wasn't really like people wouldn't they had terrible tours as well back in the day. It was just,
but they toured like in the 80s and stuff.
And I think the guy he just passed away. God, what's his name?
Chris Cotty?
No, not Chris Cotty, the manager for the Eat. And now my brain is not. I mentioned his name just earlier today. Anyway,
Bob Slade?
No, he told them to Harris. Yeah. Anyway, he told them to take a gun with them on tour because it wouldn't be safe, which they did. I think they toured with the Modettes and they just played like redneck bars and stuff, and it wasn't very favorable,
Was this in Florida or was this in other places in the country?
We toured around the country.
No, they toured. Are you talking about the Eat or us? We toured around the country, but the Eat did actually. They were like one of the earlier bands from the punk scene that actually went out toured. So they like did
79, 80.
Yeah, like
yeah.
Really.
What parts of Florida did you like to play the most outside of South Florida?
We actually would just leave Florida. We wouldn't. Sometimes we'd play Gainesville, but Gainesville, like, people just never really came to see us. So it was just like kind of annoying. So we were just like, whatever, we'll just drive to Atlanta.
Or they did when Paul was playing in the band and everyone's yelling, pull Enema, pull Enema. Like, it's just like all his friends, and stuff. It was just terrible.
So yeah, so we just I don't know. We didn't have a favorite place in Florida. Like, we just left Florida, and
our goal was get the fuck out of Florida and then continue touring. Yeah. So, and we had like really good shows in a lot of places back then.
Where do you think KLS was received the best outside of Florida?
Well, Cleveland, Ohio, there was like, we went back there a bunch of times. There was a place called Speak in Tongues that doesn't exist anymore, but it was like, a group of people there that kind of created this space to play. And in New York, we had this guy, Joey I, who booked all like, so there's this area called the Region, which is like, I don't really know specifically what it was, but it was like basically Miami. I think some bands from Gainesville. It was
where Eric and Don Lyle toured or went.
Yeah, and then
connections,
and then people from Chattanooga and maybe I think
Oakland,
and then California. But then there was like St. Augustine, like that area, the St. Augustine scene. So they were all on this tape, and so I forgot.
He did several tapes, did several tapes.
I forgot what I was going to say. I forgot
where we did well.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's this thing. What was I talking about? I don't even know.
Joey I booked us in.
Joey I. So Joey I like was a person that booked all of these bands that were from the region in New York. And there was what was the name of the records? Was it a record store?
Rock and Rex.
Rock and Rex. Yeah. And I think he might have worked there. I'm trying to remember the story, but he knew the owner, and the owner was is not alive now, but he would always book all the bands from the scene. So anytime any band wanted to,
he's still alive.
Oh yeah, I don't really know.
He's not that old.
I don't really know.
He's probably a year or two older than I am, but
oh, okay. I don't really know. Anyway, so
or my age.
So Joey I booked all the bands from our little scene of people in New York City, and that was always fun to play because he let us stay at his house with his dad, and his dad, like loved us. It was just like,
The cool thing about touring back then too, especially, was it was always a weird experience because sometimes you'd stay at people's homes and they'd still be living with their families, or a punk house. And one of my things was like, I did this at place in Cleveland, Speaking Tongues. You know, I'd show up at places, and just to keep a level of normalcy, I would wash people's dishes, even if it wasn't our own. But when people fed us, especially, I'd wash the dishes. So it made us a lot more likely to be able to come back and play there again. Because, you know, when you wash people's dishes, man, they're like, wow, you're brave. Playing punk rock houses.
Unfortunately, Robert didn't wash the dishes at our own house, which was like always filled to the top. So.
It's funny how that works out.
Sense of normalcy.
But we were the ones paying the rent, so I felt like. So Robert probably felt like other people should be washing our dishes.
Did any other Florida bands join you on any of these tours?
Harry Pussy did one of them when we went out to Gainesville,
but it wasn't a full tour. It was just going to Gainesville and back. And no, we didn't really tour with any of the other bands.
It was weird. We never did like the Stun Guns because Andy played bass with us, but he also played drums with Stun Guns.
Yeah. So I don't know why
that's kind of exhausting, man. That guy would just, you know, basically go way over the edge. And
I think he could have done both, but I just don't know why it just never.
I think he said too, if there was a band between us, he could pull it off. But
yeah. And so, but I know the Stun Guns like did tour with Los Canadians and stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe it's just because we were like a weirder band. So it just, I don't think it was like intentional. It's just like how it ended up being.
Yeah. And I know Los Canadians and of course KLS and some other bands all had music put out on Star Crunch. So what's your memory of Star Crunch and getting a chance to work with Chris as well?
Well, Star Crunch actually was a label started by Mary and Chris. They were co-owners of that. And but then Chris, you know, lived with us and stuff, and we were happy. We loved Star Crunch. You know, they were Chris. I mean, you know, after Mary passed away, you know, which was that was a real big hit to the Miami scene because Mary worked at Y&T and was a big supporter of the band. So, you know, and a lot of people don't really remember her and talk about her as much, but you know, she was a very important person in our world for sure. And Chris was really cool. I love Chris. He was supportive of all the bands from that scene. He also put out Cavity and Los Canadians.
Czars,
I think Drug Czars, which was the Eat and who else was that? Who else was in the? Oh, Jeff and Mike.
Jeff and Buddha played.
I think Buddha played in that band. So it was like a mixture of the older and younger people making a band together.
That was a cool thing too that I've noticed that was happening in the scene back then.
Yeah, that was the cool thing about the 90s was like, and Robert and I kind of talk about how this doesn't really seem to happen anymore, but bands like Morbid Opera and the Eat and the bands that were like our elders, essentially, they were like, you know, life kind of happened and they weren't playing as much. They had kids, but then their kids got old. Mike O'Brien didn't have, but you know, like
his brother did.
They had kids, so they weren't playing as much and kind of getting back into the scene. But then I think their kids got older, so then they would like kind of go check out a show, and then they were really liked it. And then like Ivy and like I would think like Ivy and Chuck and Erica were really into the older bands like Morbid Opera and the Eat and you know all the bands that were around back then. So then we'd be like, you guys should play with us. So then Morbid Opera actually reformed, the Eat actually reformed, and then we would have these shows that were like, you know, like Los Canadians with the Eat and us and Morbid Opera and Cavity. And so it was really cool. And I think the Trash Monkey, like that was pre Harry Pussy, so it was like the Trash Monkeys were also still playing then. So it was kind of cool because it was like there was like a moment where it was like super intergenerational, the scene. And I don't know, I just think that made it more fun and awesome, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know it's a lack of that really happening much. I mean, there are popular bands from, you know, back that get, you know, the kudos and stuff, but I don't know.
And I always say there's always that band that only had 2 shows that you're like, that's the best band ever. And that's just lost in time. It was just,
Yeah.
you got to see them. It was a really great show and it's just gone forever.
And a lot of those bands too from the 90s, maybe because people are just getting wasted and stuff. There were a lot of bands too that didn't put out stuff. Like it's really sad that lineup of Morbid Opera only have like that one cassette, which they recorded at this guy Rory's house on cassette 4-track, and they have like maybe 4 songs from that. I think Female Trouble and that lineup of Morbid Opera was so great because I mean, Jeff like kind of played that like Sabbathy Alice Cooper style, real trashy Greg Ginn, just noisy, distorted, loud, and then you had like the dual vocals of Libby and Lisa, so it was almost like Exene and Lydia Lunch just like harmonizing with each other. It was freaking nuts. They were so good, and it's just a shame that there wasn't more of that, that they didn't go into sync studios or whatever. But
yeah, and I don't know. I always tell people, younger people now, I'm like, the best female fronted band is Morbid Opera. If you haven't heard of that band, you should go find what little they have released and go listen to it because you'll be like, oh wow.
But the live
band
shows
was around before all the bands, that they know about. I was like, this band was doing stuff like this way before all these other bands. So I just love Miami. Like Florida just has, Florida is a lost history of music. So I'm really glad you're doing something like this because it makes people realize like, oh, okay.
Was there a band back then that, or even as the 90s went on, that KLS wanted to play with locally, but for whatever reason, he never had the chance to play a show with?
Oh, I don't know. That is a good question. I'd have to think about that. I don't know.
I mean, we were lucky to play with the Eat. That was like one of those bands from before we existed.
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky to play with Morbid Opera and the Eat.
And even like Michael Bryan was so amazing and welcoming and cool. I remember at one point because they were like one of the first bands that put out records that were like crazy collectible. Like now Broken Talent's first 7-inch goes for a lot. But the Eat
back then in the 90s, the Eat 7-inch was a big collectible. Yeah,
if you had Communist Radio, that first 7-inch, that was still like $400 back then or something. And the second one went for like $200-$300 or something along those lines. And I remember like Mike O'Brien once went to me and he's told me, yeah, there's a bunch of those records that are in our attic that were like, my brother had a bird and it shit all over a bunch of them. And he's, I'll give you one. And he showed up and he just gave me this record. It's like, this is clean. I don't see any bird shit on this one. He goes, oh yeah, I found a good one for you.
Nice. You still have it?
Yeah,
totally. Of course.
Totally.
So that was kind of cool because Michael Bryan wasn't married at the time and didn't have kids. So I think he was like he would always come to the house and hang out with us. And so he was part of
Cotty too, like Chris Cotty.
Yeah, Chris Cotty actually lived in
went by his place because he lived in Coconut Grove. He was a school teacher. And we even actually went once to see another band that Dave Daniels, he used to do this thing. Dave used to do this thing that really pissed off bands. If you have a new band that nobody knows about, he would be like, oh, Sir Robert's playing with the Funyons, the ghost of Kreamy Lectric Santa.
Or the ghost of the Trash Monkeys.
Harry Pussy was initially the ghost of the Trash Monkeys in Dave Daniels' book. Or the ghost of...
or the Stun Guns,
Eat
too.
Was a band that Chris Cotty was playing with, this kind of disco-y band with some bluesy singer in a gold lame jumpsuit. And I don't think Chris Cotty wanted anyone to know that he was in this band. But we went. It's like, oh, the ghost of the Eat. It must be a side band from the Eat. But we ended up hanging out with Chris a lot. He was such a sweet guy.
Yeah, really Chris and Mike. I mean, we did, Eddie like was busy because he had kids and a wife. So he's like busy managing that. But yeah, we didn't hang out with him as much, but he was also a very nice person.
And they were all so supportive.
And they were very supportive. But Mike and Chris were the people we actually socialized with.
Yeah, Eddie lived in Fort Lauderdale and he had kids and stuff, and he was the most sarcastic out of all of them.
He was so funny.
Like, perfect example.
Oh my God,
they were playing a show, right? They were playing, I think it was the first punk show they were playing, like with the new, it was
the same lineup, but
it was the same lineup. But yeah, so anyway, they were playing And like Chris is making wisecracks the whole time. And of course, they were done with their set and ready to pack up and just get off the stage. And they're like, encore, you're gonna song. And it's like Eddie looks at like Chris Cotty, who's a big guy, who's really huge. He goes, look at this guy. He's a fucking walking heart attack. Why do you want me to carry this shit on my back for the rest of my life? Fuck you. Like, that's so Eddie, man. He was just like, and Chris is just cracking up. And it was just like, that was the kind of sarcasm and stuff that existed back then too. People would be biting and mean and seemingly like today you would be canceled. But the fact of the matter is, there was love, man. Like everyone would just, back each other up if you needed a ride somewhere or do something or whatever. People were really good, but they just would say and do the most.
Well, I just noticed in Miami, and maybe it's because it's hot, Miami's a bit of a meaner city than most of other cities. So we like showing love was almost like insulting each other, and it was fun. And like I remember when I was
your older brother,
and I was living in the Bay Area, Los Canadians actually did a reunion when we were living out in the Bay, and because the drummer and Ivy lived out there, and Scott Baldwin, who was the drummer, lived out there, and then Timmy, I think, came and visited. I think Timmy was living in Kansas or something at the time. So he came in town. So they did a reunion. It was really awesome. And, I was like telling Ivy, like, that totally sucked. Like, couldn't you do it better? And, Ivy was laughing. And then I noticed like this person from the Bay Area was really freaking out because I was saying all this stuff to Ivy. And then I was like, oh, we're from Miami. This is how people in Miami show love to each other. They insult each other, tell each other how much they suck. It's like, don't worry.
People
is just
told
how
us we sucked a lot.
Yeah.
And especially the early days, you have to understand every single show we played, we were tripping. And quite often,
and we didn't have beginning and endings to our songs.
Yeah, that was a problem. Doc from Washington Square didn't like that very much. But anyway, so we basically, like every show, sometimes we would wait to get the acid and to drink first. And when you're drinking and then tripping, you're basically losing all inhibitions. You think you can't do any wrong. You're totally belligerent and you're freaking hallucinating. Once you're tripping and drinking, it's fine. You're good. You're home free. You're great. You could drink all day. You can totally drink until the next morning and you're not affected because.
So I'm going to tell the story about that. So so basically at one of the shows, I think someone gave Robert a Percocet and he took mushrooms and he had been drinking. And at the time,
just to prove a point.
And at the time, Tim Vaughn was playing drums. And I think it was Scott from the F-Boys. Scotty from the F-Boys had moved down back to Miami for a little while. So he was playing bass with us.
And that was the show when Nirvana were playing at Bayfront.
Oh yeah, I don't remember.
And Harry Pussy were playing that show too.
I said, I don't even remember that. So anyway, like I said, everything's one big.
And Kurt Cobain told everyone to go to Churchill's and see Harry Pussy.
You're interrupting me. Go on. Now I don't remember what I was. Oh, Robert. So basically, Robert had taken all his drugs, and it was like he, because he was hallucinating, he could really hear like something was out of tune, and he thought it. He couldn't figure out what it was. And so then he was just like, and then now I remember Kurt Cobain, because Harry Pussy, like Thurston Moore had put up a Harry Pussy record on 120 minutes. And so then all of a sudden they became this big thing. And so
as opposed to before when people were just leaving in droves whenever they
well, anyway, so then Kurt Cobain was like, you should go see this band Harry Pussy at Churchill's after this show. So basically Harry Pussy had already played and then we were playing. And while we were trying to get ready, that's when all these people came from that concert to Churchill's. So it was way more packed than usual. So it just made Robert even more nervous. And so then he threw his guitar.
2 guitars.
First, let me tell the story, Robert. He threw his guitar and I think it broke. the first guitar. So then he grabbed the second guitar and it still wasn't in tuning. He's like, oh my God. And he threw it again, his second guitar. And then I don't know.
It hit some guy's girlfriend.
Did we play?
It hit some guy's girlfriend.
Can I ask you if we played?
I think you guys were trying to play, but I was having even more trouble than you were.
So yeah, I think we ended up not playing, basically, is what happened. And then after that, this guy was yelling at Robert. He's like, dude, you hit my girlfriend.
Yeah, next time you throw your guitar, watch who you throw it at.
I mean, you asked what the crowds are like. It was a mixture of like the weirdos and then like Miami, and I'm imagining it still has this really super macho Latino like element that exists there. So you would have people like that mixed in with the weirdo crowd. So then if they happen to be in Robert's throwing the guitar, the guy's not going to be like, dude, he's getting confronted with kind of like, yo, you hit my girlfriend, you do that again, I'm going to beat your ass.
He got pretty aggro with my 90 pounds of guitar throwing savvy.
Yeah. So that was like, a story of,
yeah.
And then when the stun guns would play, Paul would always be like, whoa, fuck you, why am I doing this? Whoa. Like I actually later, and he loves it. I was like, you're like the Rodney Danger of punk rock. Rodney Dangerfield of punk rock. Because he would always be like, what am I doing? Why? You people suck. You hate me. You people hate me. So we would always throw paper. So
there was
like
never new times left in the house.
Grab all the new times and just throw paper at Paul. So like the stage would be covered with all this paper. And so it was just like, so that's kind of what shows are like. It was just like we would, Paul would someone would complain, we make fun, just wild things happen.
Yeah.
I've just never seen the stuff that's happened in Miami happen anywhere else.
We would be at the back drinking whiskey too, because Dave just didn't have hard alcohol back then, so he was totally cool about it. So I mean, we were really, really, really crazy inebriated and terrible during like I think the first 3-4 years of the band. Because I mean, we would be good in practicing, great, but then we'd play live and it was just like, yeah. And Rob Vega would be falling off the stage, and until like I think the lineup we had with Andrew Powell just was freaking phenomenal, because that guy would be more wasted than anyone at the club. Like this guy would just be like out of his freaking mind, couldn't form a sentence.
Like he couldn't walk or talk, but he
you'd
could
hand
play
him a bass or drumsticks, or
he could
guitar,
play any instrument so well.
Like
it was meticulous. Insane.
He would do crazy stuff. Like I remember we played a show in Atlanta once, and we couldn't play more than 2 or 3 songs because he would do this thing where he'd put his fingers underneath the bass strings and pull it, and just like it was this nervous tick or something that he'd have, and he'd break every single freaking bass string. So it got to the point where I think I brought my guitar in to be fixed at some shop, and Priya befriended the repair guy and told him to save.
It was Carl from, what was that place called? It was owned by the father of the girl that was in Drive Choir. And
that was a different guy. It was a different.
No, Carl gave us the bass strings.
It was a different guy.
I do like Drive Choir though. Good.
Oh, they're great. They're awesome. But anyway, yeah. So he started saving all the bass strings for us. So Andrew would put these old bass strings on because he'd freaking break them, and they were expensive, man. But yeah, there's that.
Yeah, and when Andrew passed, how did that impact the two of you?
Well, I had already had my injury, so we were talking, but we weren't living in the same city and stuff like that. But yeah, it was
he was having a hard time like going back.
It impacted us.
Miami.
Well, I'll just say it did impact us. We were like family, so it was just I mean, to this day we miss. I mean, when we're playing with other people, like God, I wish Andrew was here, because it just like our chemistry was so good.
There was a spirit that happened with the band, and it took a really interesting direction when Andrew started playing with us. Like me and Andrew would just click off each other in a way that I haven't been able to click off with anyone ever since. Not to say any of the other musicians we played with, it hasn't been amazing, but with Andrew, it was just like, it was next level crazy. It was just, it got like, there was something going on that was like, when you play with some people, like for instance, Priya played with Michael Griffith from Noggin and Behead the Prophet, and they came through Miami and she met him, and he was older than us. He was in his 60s back then. And they just had such an amazing like connection. They play free music together, know to slow down here or stop suddenly.
Yeah, like we wouldn't see each other for years, and then we'd be like, let's play some free music, and then we just synced in.
There was an intuitive nature, like it's like jazz, there's something that just happens when you see jazz artists where someone from Germany and someone from America and someone from Sweden all get together and they never even met, and they're just like doing some standard and then just go off and play free or improv, and there's just this connection and something gelling. It was like that with Andrew. It was just like next level crazy. And you have to feel, it's kind of almost like the trust game when someone drops into your arms and you feel comfortable doing that. There was just something where like the bottom could drop out completely and it would just be incredible. Like something would flower from that, and whether or not it sounds corrosive or terrible or great or spectacular or all the above, it was just always that. With Andrew, he was just an incredible person. But we lived in LA at first. After Priya had her injury, we first moved with her parents. That's a whole story unto itself. I mean, we can get into that too if you want to hear. But we moved, initially we were living in Atlanta when it happened. Should I tell this story?
We moved to Hershey and then we moved to LA, but that's when Andrew died. And I think Brad, who called us? Was it Brad that told us?
I remember I was working at Hertz Rent-A-Car. And yeah, I think Priya called me. Our friend Brad told Priya that he died. And, he liked to party and he stopped doing harder drugs, but he did something, and
he fell off the wagon, which is a very common for drug addicts. When they start and they stop, they're kind of used to doing it at a level they were in
but we were
before. So I think it was just too much. And
we were talking about playing music again, and he had a kid with Kira. So I mean, it always seemed like, yeah, it probably isn't going to happen. We weren't ready to move back to Miami. We basically, here's the story. I'll tell it really quickly because a lot of people have heard it already, but we were living in Miami. It started getting to the point where like we like to party and drink and stuff and do whatever, but we never really were into the hard stuff. And a lot of people we knew were. And for some stupid reason, we thought, let's move to Atlanta as a halfway point to sort of get, away from Miami, away from that influence, we just went as far as we could with things there. We felt like, things weren't going to move any further. And so we moved to Atlanta with the intention of moving to the Bay Area, where people have forever like, you guys are such a Bay Area type band. So anyway, we moved there. We were there for less than a year. There was a show at this place, C11. It was this warehouse space, and some friends were playing Fiend Without a Face, which is Brent, who's in Mastodon now. And Priya went on to a loft adjoining a skate ramp that should have been closed off, but they had an open area.
Oh, by the way, we just learned all this information.
We learned more information.
Because this person came and interviewed me because they're kind of doing like a little, I don't know, they want to kind of archive they're from Atlanta, so the scene, the Southern scene. And so, yeah, so we just learned like a couple of months ago when she came and interviewed us that they were doing some work on the skate ramp and they weren't going to have that. They were kind of debating about whether they should have the show or not. And we didn't know anything of this for like 20 years. But so I guess they thought, oh, let's put a couch up here and this would prevent people from coming. And I was like, I told the girl, I was like, or the woman, I was like, that's inviting. A couch is inviting. It's so anyway, not distracting.
They all went up to smoke.
We all went up to smoke, and I fell through this.
Everyone else stepped over the hole. And I went through the hole. It was 13 feet, went buttocks first, hit her head. They had to keep her in a medicated coma for the first 2 weeks because one thing would complicate the other. If she moved or whatever, coughed, that would probably complicate her spinal injury. So basically, like right after that, a lot of people, her dad was basically trying to make some money for Priya so she wouldn't be impoverished or poor, because of course, you know, having a spinal injury puts you in a very precarious situation. So she
How did you
so
know? How did you know it was as serious as it was? When did you learn of that, Priya?
To be honest, I I was unconscious for like about 8 months. They put me in a medicated
it was
coma
2 weeks.
because
Yeah, you were conscious.
no, I was in a medicated coma. So they were trying to keep my brain, I had brain swelling. So they were trying to, I did have a slight brain injury. It wasn't a traumatic brain injury, but slight things happened. And so they were just trying to, they were in emergency mode. So they were just trying to make sure. And then like, even like my relatives would come visit. So like, if it was an uncle I hadn't seen in a long time, I guess I was reacting to it. So they were like saying, you can't go in there because you're exciting her too much. So it wasn't, I was in Grady, I believe, for 8 months. Then they switched me to Shepherd Center, which is a spinal cord injury clinic. And I don't know, like I did wake up, but I wasn't sure, like, I didn't really know what happened exactly. And then this is like, and I talked to another woman that had a spinal cord injury, and we kind of talked about how they don't tell you like what's going on with you. Like they kind of, I think it's more like to prevent you from like being too shocked or something. I don't really know. It must be a psychological reason, but they kind of let you discover it. Like you just discover it on your own instead of a doctor. It's not like TV where they're like, you've had a spinal cord injury, you will never walk again, type of thing. Like that's like how they show it in movies. But the reality was like, yeah, I just didn't really know. And um
She woke up basically after a couple of weeks and she smelled like all, because McDonald's was across the street, and she smelled the French fries. And the first thing that came out of her mouth was, I want some French fries.
yeah, and I do have a vague memory because I had like they had an IV. So like I don't know if anyone can see my hand, but you see I have this scar on my hand. That's actually from an IV that was in my hand. And I have a vague memory of, I think my mom was sitting in there, and I think I don't know if this is true, but I like have this vague memory that I was telling my mom, my hand is swollen, and because they knew I had an infection, but they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And I guess they searched everywhere, but they didn't check the IV. And so then they did check the IV, and that was the source of the infection. And so, but I like, those are the vague memories I have, but I don't remember falling. I don't remember the injury at all. And I actually found out about 17 years after my injury, I had Chattanooga had, they don't, after the pandemic started, they don't do this fest anymore, but they had a fest called Do You Hear We Festival. And it was like, it's kind of just like bands from the scene, like a fest, and it's like a family reunion type of thing, because everyone from Chattanooga and Florida, and we've all moved to different parts of the country. So whenever that fest would happen, we'd all kind of go there and play. And it was really fun because you see everyone again. And so my friend Josette, who was up there with me, who was one of the people that walked over the whole, like, she's like, oh, don't you remember? And she visited me a couple of times, but I don't know. I just figured she would tell me if she, I don't know. I never asked her, like, what happened, Josette? What happened up there? So then she's like, oh, you don't know? And I was like, no, I don't remember. She goes, oh. And then she told me, she goes, oh, we all went up there. Me, you, and Andrew went up there to smoke some pot. And me and Andrew walked over, and I guess I was behind Josette, and she's like, and I turned around and you weren't there. And then I think she probably was the one that realized like I had fallen. And this happened at C11. And that warehouse space was like all these artists and different, C11 was there, and that was like more like punk shows and stuff. But there was all these different warehouses where it was like art, more like artist collective and stuff like that. And a little bit, I found this out from the people that came to interview me for this other docuseries that they're working on, had told me that, like, I guess a woman was living there and had started a fire, and so like the landlord was like, okay, no more, like
that whole space was shut down.
The whole space was shut down in that way. I'm sure it was like allowed a storage space essentially, which is what it was meant to be, but
or housing. I mean,
or maybe I don't know. I'm sure he sold the property. Maybe I don't know what happened, but it wasn't used in the way it was before anymore. So it was like interesting because another person had also slipped and fell, and they broke their leg, like about a month after me.
Up by a bunch of skinheads, and he was killed. Right?
I don't know. I can't.
Yeah, they mentioned that there was a bunch of crazy stuff that happened, not at that specific warehouse, but at the
space, in that space,
like other different
locations in that warehouse space. So yeah, the owner was like, "Okay, this is the end of that. We're not doing that anymore." So
yeah, with such a life-changing event like that, at what point did you start to play music again and try to pick up where you left off, even if you could at that point? What was that like?
It's kind of interesting because I'll literally tell you, like, while I was in the spinal cord injury clinic, they always make you do this outpatient with a therapist, because obviously when things like this happen to people, depression and these types of things happen, and it's not rare. It's it's not meant to happen, but it's natural for these things to happen when you lose ability, especially in such a way where it's like overnight. So I was like talking to the outpatient therapist, because I was always like, I am really talkative, but when I'm in like areas like that, I become very, and I don't want to say I think I become more introspective, like, rather than, it's not that I'm not trying to be social. I'm just like more processing what was going on and thinking. And so literally my first thought process was like, okay, how do I continue being in the band, doing all these things that I've been working, kind of, because it was all like hard work in a way, right? So it wasn't easy to do. It's just we love doing it. So that's why we did it. And that was the reward, that we got to do the thing we loved. And so I was like thinking, oh, I can transfer and I can do this. I can do that. So I was just like, I could still do. So I was like trying to think, how can I do all these things that I was doing before from a wheelchair? And that's what I told the therapist. I was like, I don't know. I notice a lot of people kind of are focusing on what they were able to do, but I'm just like kind of more focusing on how can I do now? How can I continue to do what I was doing before, but now from this position? And for me, when I became disabled, that's kind of the mindset I was in, where I wasn't like, oh no, I used to be able to do this, but now I can't do that anymore. I think because of my mother, it kind of informed me like, well, whatever, it doesn't matter that you can't do it like that, because you can adjust and do it differently.
Yeah. And just thinking about your families, I know we were talking about something definitely more serious, but thinking about your families, and did they ever share any opinions with either of you about the music of Kreamy Lectric Santa?
Robert's mom was very supportive. She loved it. My parents just pretended like it wasn't happening. She did. Robert, your mom was so into you. She's like, everything Robert does is great. And I was just like, Robert's so lucky. He has such a sweet, supportive mother. But I don't know. Robert would play this music for her, and it wasn't her thing, obviously, but she never had a negative thing to say. And my parents, because I did not become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or marry, or I'm not married, but like my partner was not a doctor, lawyer, or engineer.
I was a mad scientist,
but he was a mad scientist. But they just like they would just pretend like the band wasn't happening. They just, like, when I would visit them, they never really talked about the art or my band. We just talk about other things.
Yeah.
So they just ignored the band, even though I gave them a release and it would be sitting there. They would have all the KLS releases in there amongst all their tchotchkes of stuff that because my parents, even after my brother and I moved out, they traveled a lot. Like they would everything, because my dad was a professor. So every winter break and spring break, they would go to, they kept traveling after my brother and I left. So, like they would collect, they would buy things from these countries and decorate their house with it. And amongst that, the KLS releases were so it is recognized in a certain way.
Yeah.
So I remember, I think after my injury, I don't know if it was after my injury, I think Robert played like a song that I was screaming in. And I think my dad was like, "Is that you?" I was like, "Yes." So that was like the first time my dad was like, "Oh my God." And
he said, "You take after your mother."
No, he did not say that. He just pretended. He again went back to pretending like it didn't happen. But if I'm gonna plug Mark's book here. Oh, someone's at the door, so Robert has to go. So I'll plug Mark's book. So Mark Masters wrote this book, High Bias, which is the history of cassette tapes. And Robert is actually mentioned in this book. I wish I could remember the guy's name, but read the book and then you'll know the guy's name. So go buy this book. Anyway, he mentioned, I think Mark Masters asked him who influenced you, and he goes, "Oh man, Robert Price from Kreamy Lectric Santa told me to do this stuff with cassette tapes." And so that's like what really influenced the way he did things and stuff. So
wow. Yeah. So I mean, what was that? Was that a surprise that someone would have brought that up as that being so influential?
Yeah, it was funny because we knew the editor of the book, and he kind of told Robert, "Oh yeah, like you guys are mentioned in this book. I'm editing this book." And I just didn't. Robert told me in passing, and I just wasn't paying that. I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And then there was a book. Mark came here and did a book signing, and we just went to it just to go, because like, oh, like, let's go meet him. I guess we're in this book, it'll be nice to talk to him. But then in the book signing, Ernesto, who was the editor, was like, "And Priya and Robert, their band is in the book." And then they're mentioned in this book. They're mentioned in this book, and we were like, ugh. So it was kind of awkward because we were just like in the back of the book signing and just listening to, it was just interesting because it's just like, if you come from the era where cassettes existed, it's just like cassette culture was so important to things getting known. Like, of course, there was the Grateful Dead type of thing where people would make cassette recordings of their records, and now people mixtapes of that, and they'd be like, I have culture. 4-track culture. And so like, and then even like the region rock thing, that was Erica Lyle made mixtapes of all the bands that they came across in that 90s era, and it was the first affordable means to and then people would take that tape and they'd like the tape and they would make copies of it. And so it was just like this underground way of things spreading. So
did you both have a preference at which one you preferred, whether it was going in the studio or playing live?
They're different animals.
Playing live is just really fun, and it's like a different energy. And
playing live is like masturbating in front of people, while like recording is more like you're thinking about something and then you're working on something and you're formulating ideas and then masturbating in front of people. But it's in parts. It's
a good analogy.
Constructed in a new way.
Nice.
Well, and then like Robert's like
I still got it.
Erica coined the term of Robert being the mad scientist of punk rock. And so, yeah, that's like where, in the studio, and when we write the songs, it's very like, we'll come in and then we'll have a part that's like going, it's really melodic. Then Robert's like, oh no, let's change it, play something different at this part and then go back to, so it's always like,
that's why we're so famous.
Creating. But yeah, so the recording is really like the exploratory part, and then I don't know, live is like, I don't know. I have another theory about playing live. I think when you play live, it's like it really stimulates parts of your brain. So I think people actually get a little addicted to like playing live shows because people are there and they're like, yay, and it's like you're celebrating and it's really fun. And that feeling, you like that feeling. So
and like live too, like I think we play loud, we turn it up, and we're not specific to that too, though. But like to me, it's always been like KLS as opposed to the Prom Sluts. The Prom Sluts, we had songs, we played them, we were tight, we were good, we were garagey, we were trashy. But to me, like punk rock, if I'm going to do punk rock, to me, punk rock is about breaking the rules. And part of breaking the rules is like, why am I going to play a bunch of Chuck Berry riffs? He's amazing. I love Chuck Berry. I love the Ramones. I love rock and roll. I love all that stuff, but it's been freaking done. Do we need another Ramones band? Do we need another Chuck Berry? Do we need another Dave Matthews? You could ask yourself that. I don't think so. But to me, it's like you should be creative and just like lose yourself in the moment. To me, those are the elements that really make playing music worthwhile and make it like great, and vibrant and intense. And like, I talked a little bit earlier about doing drugs and getting fucked up and all that stuff. But really, to be honest, like music is like that, even without doing anything. Now, I think I do a lot more psychedelic music than I did back when I was doing psychedelics and tripping and going off the deep end. Cause you kind of learn how to do things and get comfortable with yourself and get comfortable with the music you're creating and think more outside of the box and not get stuck in the box or buried in the box, which is pretty bad if you're alive. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. To me, it's like more about being creative and losing yourself in the moment is really the importance of it.
And the live thing is more performative. So we would come up with plans of what we're going to like. I think Robert one time wore like, what was the thing where we had people take Kamala and everyone take off your clothes?
Well, at the time, like Marilyn Manson was really popular. We were doing a show in Fort Lauderdale. Load were playing there, and Load played there a lot. And Bob Slade was their manager. And apparently they owed Bob Slade a bunch of money. And he talked us into doing a show there. And we hadn't played a KLS show there since the Prom Sluts. Like that was my last band that played in Fort Lauderdale because I used to live there. So playing a show there, KLS playing a show there, meant that probably we would have made some money if we didn't agree to Bob Slade giving him money because Load owed him money. And essentially we went to go play the show and we were thinking like, what can we do to fuck with people? So I had long hair. I had really long black hair and I shaved it off like 2 weeks before, like totally bald. Like I just shaved my head completely. I looked like I walked away from Dachau. I was really skinny and really freaking emaciated and looked like fucking terrifying. So I put on this black wig and I'm like doing sound check and hanging out. And I'm in this gold lame jumpsuit. It looked like something my mother would wear to like a nightclub back in the 70s to look all sexy. And I'm walking around and just people are talking to me that saw me like after I shaved my head. And for some reason, they're still like thinking, oh, this is Robert. They're not realizing it's a freaking wig. And then I just did something on stage about sensationalism and bullshit and whatever. And they pulled the wig off and take off my gold lame jumpsuit and have a t-shirt and jeans underneath. I was like, because like Fort Lauderdale was always more about sensationalism. It was always about dressing up and looking cool and goth and all that stuff, and which is cool. I have nothing against that, but it was really kind of very like people were just very much into this kind of superficial trip. And I think a lot more bands in Miami weren't so much into that. Not to say everyone wasn't into that, but in general, like, you know, the Churchill scene was more about just like, fuck that, whatever, and not, you know, having a plan and just working out and being super tight and all this stuff. We're, you know, there's a lot more trashy bands from Miami and stuff. So, yeah.
What was the reaction like when the wig came off?
I don't know. I forgot.
I think Juan Montoya was at that show. He's like, oh my God. He was like, told Robert, my God, Robert, I totally didn't forgot you shaked your head. That was awesome. Juan Montoya was one of our biggest fans. Even when we really sucked, he always liked us. He was always like, you guys are great. And I'm like, thank you.
Why don't you do Sandy Duncan anymore? Which was a Prom Slut song we stopped doing, KLS.
Yeah.
Dreaming Soft of Sandy Duncan. Here, let me play it for you. It's freaking terrible. Here.
Dreaming soft of Sandy Duncan, Sandy Duncan, dreaming soft of sexual function when the world becomes under control. Nothing left but Sandy this and Sandy that. Sandy Duncan.
Nice.
I haven't played that song in 30 years. But
The dog is like, what happened?
Robert, you broke your guitar. That guitar is great. It doesn't break. Yeah.
No, it's great. I'm glad that the guitar was more than a prop. So you
that
came through, Robert.
I didn't plan to do anything with the guitar.
I know. Robert's like, let me play it. Like,
it was the right moment for that to happen. So
stupid fucking song. It's just goofy lyrics and really like,
I think it's actually a good song. I like, maybe the lyrics aren't really that great, but I like the song.
Stimulating.
I like the song.
I'm not
is
sure
there
is a smart person.
Is there a KLS song that you think back on that just has been one of your favorites to play out live?
Oh gosh, let's see.
I mean, we still do a lot of songs like Who's Got the New America, which seems really profound these days.
I think that Robert, actually, that's the song Robert wrote like while he was in the Prom Sluts. And I still think, I'm like, that song should really be a hit. It's like, I think it's profound in every decade that song has existed.
It's a ripoff of Pop Goes the World by Men Without Hats and Neil Diamond, America, Coming to America. But yes, it's a very interesting song I wrote by myself without any help or influences from anything else. But yeah, no, actually, it's cool because I do like lyrics that aren't very specific and don't necessarily point at anything. So the song is Who's Got the New America, but the lyrics are very abstract and weird and don't necessarily point at anything directly. Like, you know, it's like lines like the Kennedy family Robinson, they understand. Or Who's Got the New Sexual Freedom. And it's just very abstract, but still kind of making the statement sort of about something more on an abstract sense where you can come up with your own concept of what it's about.
And then, you know, that leads people that are listening to kind of attach their own ideas of what the song is about.
Yeah. Yeah, which I like that.
Yeah.
It's
where
good.
did you spend most of your time writing a lot of the songs?
In the bathroom? In the tub? No.
Well, actually, one of the songs that I actually like playing because it's a good violin song is Holding Yourself. And so Robert actually started writing that song in the bath. He was in the bathroom and he recorded it on a cassette tape. And then it's kind of like we've had that song on different recordings, just kind of building it up and then finally the last record the Operation Spacetime Cinderblock was like the final
We had Baby
production,
Grand Piano,
like the
we
final
had
production
Bassoon,
of that song with
we had
bassoon,
stand-up
and all these
bass.
things.
I found people that played all sorts of classical instruments and stuff, and but yeah, it kind of grew through a lot of changes, and then after that, it's like, okay, we don't have to play that anymore, at least for a week or two.
Well, you're gonna play it live, but the recording of that song was like, was fully produced, so it was like,
and the lyrics changed each time.
Yeah, the lyrics
on
changed.
each recording, and yeah, it's kind of fun. I like doing that.
Yeah.
I like.
But the origins of the song came from the bathroom.
Yeah, it did. I don't know why.
Holding yourself just to hold you down. Do you got what it takes to make yourself feel so good? Do you know how it feels? Do you know what's real? Dance around the room like sexy 70s in a tomb. Bring you down, bring you down. Little things in life. It's all those little things that build up and make life so special. Yeah, but it's not about masturbating, even though it seems like it is. It's actually, it was a friend of ours that was really obsessive and fucked up on drugs. That I'm not going to mention their name because they're no longer with us. And they were calling our house in the middle of the night and looking for this guy and just being really like needy and emotional and just like damaging, and just like they needed to kind of look at themselves a little deeper and probably get some help or something. And fortunately, so that was part of it, but the other part of it was about masturbation.
Glad we got the behind the music tale.
Behind the music.
Don't get me started on Boo 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 Gumbo Gumbo La 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 number 5, which is a Prom Sluts song that was on a KLS cassette, but it was on our first actual release. But
yeah,
it says Prom Sluts on the CD.
Yeah. So in today's world, and compared to what it was back during the early period of KLS, what is this difference for you both now, still playing KLS music now versus back in the 90s?
People hate us again.
That's not true. It's just different because it's like harder to find people to commit to play with us, because our songs are very complicated, and people are always like, I don't know, your songs are so complicated, but I'm just like, if they're just like, I always tell them, if I can play them, you can play that, because I made these great music, so it's just harder.
You do things one at a time. Like all our complicated songs, initially it's funny because the complicated songs me and Andy started doing just to fuck with Tim, because Tim, the drummer, was amazing and more than capable of playing weird changes, but he really wanted us to do more like rock and roll and normal stuff, and all my weird ideas were shot down. So me and Andrew would work out all these timing changes and all this weird stuff and these like 1 minute prog instrumentals and stuff that were just really difficult. But then when we started doing that stuff, people were like, holy shit, what the fuck are they doing? It's like, it was just so like not what you'd expect to see at a punk show, you know what I mean? And we were just like, and I mean, I've always been into like, I mean, I like all kinds of music. I don't like just, television and Richard Hell. I like actual Jethro Tull. I like bands that are a little bit more progressive. I like Gong is one of my favorite bands. Their third album, Kreamy Lectric, is by far one of my favorite records. So yeah, I'd love to challenge myself and not be bored. So, it was kind of fun to play those songs, and so that being said, that became like a thing that we started doing. And just initially that was really just to give our drummer a hard time, and he learned them and was just amazing. So no reason to bitch there, people were impressed.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you are still, creating music, right? So is there anything upcoming from KLS?
Well,
I'm working on developing stuff. We need to find a label willing to put it out, people labels, people with money. Also, we'd like to actually work on a documentary, and part of the documentary would be us touring with Priya in a wheelchair, going into places where someone in a wheelchair probably shouldn't be doing, but she's like a regular stunt person, so she can climb up stairs and crawl into places or do things that we did that when she first had her injury, so that's part of the course. So if anyone does a documentary and wants to film us doing what we do, that is something we'd like to do. But also too, we do have recordings from various places. We haven't put out a record in more than 14 years because the last full length was 14 years. So I'm working on just redeveloping stuff that we recorded. I'm not quite happy with a lot of the recordings. So we did a lot of stuff during COVID with electronics. So that's sort of a newish thing, although that was always part of things kind of. But so yeah, we're just working on new stuff, new things, playing some shows as a duo with electronics. And as I said, Zuki here has been playing pads with her paws. So people are pretty shocked when you have a little chihuahua coming out and go. It scares the fuck out of her, but people in the audience are like, whoa, a little chihuahua playing freaking crazy noises on a toy drum set. It's like, but you could run that shit through MIDI and it could be anything, man. Fucking
true.
Little cute dog kicking ass. That's the future.
There you go.
He might be dead, but this little fucker is going to be a star.
Well,
anyway,
it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast to tell the story of Kreamy Lectric Santa, and also talking about the Prom Sluts too, because that was nice to talk about that band as well. So as we get ready to kind of close things out, I kind of want to turn over to you both to kind of share your last word. Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I don't know, Robert. Any final thoughts? You seem to have a lot of thoughts.
Can I be poetic for a moment?
Robert's on the coffee rush. I can't keep up. I just think I don't know. I don't know what final thoughts would be. We just love playing music and being creative, and that's kind of what it's about for us. And we were lucky to have this moment where we kind of fit into something that people really enjoyed, but we're just going to continue to do our thing, I guess, right? I don't know.
As I lay here dying. But in all seriousness, we're just going to keep doing this. And as I say, until the third stroke or 14th heart attack or whatever the hell takes our asses out, we're going to keep doing it until we're fucking gone. So I don't care, whatever. If people like it, they like it. If they don't like it, they don't like it. That's always been the motif of where we're coming from, our thing, so protocol. And we're just going to keep on keeping on, man. Whatever.
Yes.
I think
that's what we're going to do.
By the time you put this out, we'll both be dead. But the dog will live on playing those little pads. It'll be cute.